Welcome to True Crime Threads. A secret love leads to a tragic murder. Zion and Faris, two Muslim brothers, grew up in a tightly knit family in a small suburban neighborhood. Their parents, devout and traditional, ensured that every aspect of their lives was guided by faith, discipline, and a strong sense of family values. From the outside, they appeared to have an ideal sibling relationship, one built on trust and camaraderie. The community admired them, Zion for his studiousness and ambition, and Faris for his artistic talent and friendly demeanor. Zion, the elder brother, was seen as the pride of the family. Diligent and responsible, he pursued a career in medicine with the goal of fulfilling his parents' dreams. Faris, 2 years younger, was the creative soul of the family. While his parents valued his artistic skills, they often reminded him that art could never be more than a hobby. His free-spirited nature was a contrast to Zion's methodical and focused personality. Despite their differences, the brothers shared an unspoken understanding of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. From a young age, Zion and Faris had been inseparable. They played together, studied together, and shared countless late-night conversations in their shared room. Over time, this close bond deepened into something neither of them fully understood. What began as an unwavering sibling connection took on an intensity that crossed boundaries. By their late teens, they both realized their feelings for each other were no longer confined to familial affection. At first, Zion and Faris tried to suppress these emotions, knowing full well how forbidden such feelings were within their family, their faith, and their community. They carried the weight of their secret with silent anguish, unsure of how to proceed. The fear of being discovered loomed over them constantly. Zion, ever the pragmatist, tried to focus on his studies, hoping that distractions would help him suppress his feelings. Faris, however, struggled more openly. His sketches grew darker, his journal entries more reflective of the turmoil he felt. Their late-night conversations became moments of vulnerability. In the quiet darkness of their shared room, they would exchange fleeting touches, stolen glances, and whispered confessions. Every moment they spent together was a blend of euphoria and dread. The intensity of their relationship became their escape from the rigid expectations imposed on them. For Faris, Zion was his anchor, the one person who understood him completely. For Zion, Faris was the only one who saw through the facade of perfection he maintained for their family. But as their bond deepened, so did their fear of exposure. They knew that if their secret came to light, it would shatter their family and disgrace their parents. Their faith, which had always been a source of guidance and comfort, now felt like an unrelenting force pushing them further into guilt and shame. Zion, always cautious, began to pull back, warning Faris to be more discreet. Faris, on the other hand, yearned for the freedom to express his love without fear. The weight of their secret took a toll on both brothers. Zion buried himself in his studies, while Faris retreated further into his art and writing. Their shared moments grew rarer but no less intense. Every glance, every touch carried with it an unspoken acknowledgement of the risks they were taking. Their love for each other became both their solace and their burden, a secret that tied them together even as it threatened to tear them apart. The secret relationship between Zion and Faris grew stronger, fueled by a mixture of love, fear, and defiance of the expectations surrounding them. They became adept at hiding their connection, mastering the art of subtlety. A touch that lingered too long, a stolen glance across the dinner table, or moments alone in their shared room, all of these carried a depth of emotion that only they understood. Every interaction outside of these private moments was carefully calculated to avoid suspicion. Their bond became their sanctuary, but it also cast a shadow over their lives. Faris, the more expressive of the two, found solace in recording their story through art and writing. His journal became a sacred repository for his emotions. He filled its pages with poetic musings, raw confessions, and sketches that symbolized their love. The journal was his way of preserving the fleeting moments they shared. For Faris, it was a tangible piece of their connection, one that he could hold on to in times of doubt and fear. Zion, however, saw the journal as a potential threat. He knew that if anyone found it, their secret would unravel, bringing ruin to their family. He urged Ferris to destroy it, to erase any trace of their relationship, but Ferris couldn't bring himself to do so. To him, the journal was more than paper and ink. It was a testament to their truth, however forbidden. As much as they tried to maintain control, the weight of their secret began to seep into other aspects of their lives. Zion's once steady focus faltered. He became more reserved and distant, his mind often preoccupied with the dangers of their situation. His parents noticed the change but attributed it to the stress of his studies. Ferris, on the other hand, became more erratic. His sketches grew darker, filled with abstract forms and heavy strokes that hinted at the turmoil within him. He avoided family gatherings whenever he could, claiming he needed time to work on his art. The tension between Zion and Ferris reached a new height when their parents introduced Zion to Ifra, a young woman from a respected family in the community. The introduction came as a surprise, though Zion had always known this day would come. In their world, arranged marriages were common, and the expectation that Zion would eventually marry and start a family was never in question. For Zion, the prospect of engagement felt like an inevitable burden, one he would have to shoulder to maintain appearances. Ferris, however, saw it differently. The news of Ifra's introduction cut him deeply. He felt betrayed, even though he knew Zion had no choice. To Ferris, the engagement symbolized a rejection of their love, a step toward the life society demanded rather than the life they wanted. Zion tried to reassure Ferris, insisting that the engagement was merely a way to deflect suspicion, but the damage was done. Ferris began to withdraw further, his emotions oscillating between heartbreak and resentment. The strain between them became harder to ignore. They still stole moments together, but those moments were often overshadowed by unspoken tension. Ferris's journal entries became more desperate, his sketches more chaotic. Zion, caught between his duty to his family and his love for his brother, struggled to hold everything together. The fear of exposure was constant, an invisible threat that loomed over them. Their love, once a source of comfort and joy, had become a double-edged sword. It connected them in ways no one else could understand, yet it also isolated them from the rest of the world. Their secret was no longer just theirs to keep. It had become a silent force that dictated their every action, every thought, and every decision. The life they had built together was fragile, and they both knew it was only a matter of time before it would be tested in ways they could never have imagined. Zion's decision to move forward with the engagement to Ifra marked a turning point in his relationship with Ferris. The once unbreakable bond between the brothers began to fracture under the weight of resentment, heartbreak, and misunderstanding. Zion viewed the engagement as a necessary facade, a way to protect their secret and preserve their family's honor. For Ferris, it was an act of betrayal, a declaration that their love could never truly exist in the light of day. As the engagement became official, the family celebrated with a small gathering. Relatives and friends praised Zion for his sense of responsibility and for choosing a path that aligned with their cultural and religious values. Ifra, a kind and soft-spoken young woman, seemed perfect in every way, but to Ferris, she represented everything he could never have. Each congratulatory word spoken about Zion and Ifra felt like another nail in the coffin of their relationship. During the celebration, Ferris could barely contain his emotions. His smiles were forced, his laughter hollow. His family noticed his discomfort but dismissed it as typical of Ferris's introspective nature. After all, he had always been the quieter, more sensitive of the two brothers. But in reality, Ferris was seething with a mixture of heartbreak and anger. He excused himself midway through the event and left the house, retreating to a park nearby where he could be alone with his thoughts. As Ferris sat on a bench under the dim glow of a street lamp, he felt an overwhelming sense of abandonment. The person he had trusted most, the one who had promised to love him unconditionally, was now stepping into a life where Ferris had no place. The weight of their secret, once a shared burden, now felt like his alone to bear. When Zion found Faris hours later in their shared room, their interaction was strained. Zion tried to justify his actions, explaining that the engagement was nothing more than a formality, a way to keep their family and community from asking questions. Faris listened in silence, his face blank but his heart raging. For him, the engagement wasn't just a facade, it was proof that Zion was willing to sacrifice their love to maintain his image. Their relationship became increasingly strained in the weeks that followed. Faris avoided Zion as much as possible, spending more time in his room, sketching furiously or writing in his journal. His art took on a darker tone, filled with sharp angles and chaotic forms that mirrored the emotional turmoil inside him. His journal entries, once filled with poetic reflections on their love, now contained bitter musings and pleas for understanding. One night, in a moment of carelessness, Faris left his journal on their desk. Zion, returning late from work, noticed it immediately. Despite his better judgment, he opened it and began reading. Page after page detailed their secret relationship, their stolen moments, and Faris's raw emotions. The sketches accompanying the entries were haunting, capturing their love in ways words couldn't. Panic set in as Zion realized the danger the journal posed. If anyone else found it, their lives would be destroyed. Without hesitation, Zion took the journal outside to the backyard, lit a match, and burned it. He watched as the pages curled and blackened, their secrets reduced to ash. When Faris discovered what Zion had done, his devastation was palpable. The journal had been more than a collection of memories, it had been his lifeline, a way to process the complexities of their relationship. Zion's act felt like a complete erasure of their love, a betrayal far greater than the engagement itself. From that moment on, the fragile balance they had managed to maintain began to crumble. The brothers, once inseparable, were now divided by anger, heartbreak, and the looming threat of exposure. Each day brought them closer to a breaking point, one that neither could have anticipated but both could feel approaching like a storm on the horizon. The destruction of Faris's journal marked a critical shift in the brothers' relationship. For Faris, it was the ultimate betrayal, a deliberate act to erase not only their love but also the emotional outlet that had kept him grounded amidst the chaos. He became withdrawn and bitter, retreating further into himself. He stopped sharing his sketches with anyone and began isolating himself from family gatherings, even avoiding Zion entirely whenever possible. The once unshakable bond they shared now felt irreparably broken. Faris's anguish began to manifest in destructive ways. His anger turned inward, fueling a growing sense of hopelessness. He began neglecting his art and instead spent hours brooding in silence. His mind raced with thoughts of revenge, of ways to make Zion feel the pain and betrayal he felt so deeply. The world that had once felt so full of promise now seemed suffocating, with no escape in sight. Meanwhile, Zion grappled with his own guilt and fear. He knew burning the journal had been a drastic step, but he justified it as a necessary act to protect their family and their secret. Yet, he couldn't ignore the rift it had created between him and Faris. The engagement to Ifrah only added to the growing tension. Every time Zion interacted with her, he felt like a fraud. Ifrah's kindness and excitement about their future only deepened his sense of unease. He was living a double life, torn between the expectations of his family and his love for Faris, which now seemed irretrievably lost. Faris's simmering anger finally reached a boiling point when he decided to confide in Amir, a mutual friend who had been close to the brothers for years. Faris believed Amir would understand his pain and provide the support he desperately needed. In a moment of vulnerability, Faris revealed everything: their secret relationship, the depth of his feelings for Zion, and the betrayal he felt over the engagement and the destruction of the journal. Faris didn't consider the possibility that Amir might not be the confidant he hoped for. Amir was stunned by the revelation. Raised with the same strict values and traditions as Zion and Faris, he struggled to process what he had just heard. His shock quickly turned to a sense of loyalty toward Zion. Amir felt obligated to warn Zion about the potential consequences of Faris's disclosure. He understood the risk of the secret becoming public and how devastating it would be for everyone involved. When Amir confronted Zion, the elder brother was blindsided. The betrayal stung deeply, but it also confirmed his worst fear that their secret was now hanging by a thread. Zion knew Faris had acted out of pain, but the stakes had grown too high to ignore. In a heated confrontation with Faris later that night, Zion accused him of being reckless, of endangering their family's future for the sake of his emotions. Faris, feeling cornered, lashed out. He declared that he could no longer live in the shadows, pretending to be someone he wasn't. For him, exposing their secret was not only a way to regain control, but also a means of forcing Zion to confront the truth about their relationship. The argument escalated, their words cutting deep as years of love and resentment collided in a flurry of accusations and emotions. That night marked the point of no return. The fragile threads holding their lives together were unraveling faster than either of them could stop. Faris's desire for validation and Zion's desperation to maintain control had put them on a collision course, one that would inevitably lead to a devastating conclusion neither could foresee. The walls they had built to protect their secret were crumbling, and with them, the foundation of their relationship. The tension between Zion and Faris reached its breaking point, consuming both brothers in a storm of emotions they could no longer control. Faris's growing resentment, combined with Zion's guilt and fear, created a volatile dynamic that was destined to end in disaster. Every interaction between them now felt like a battleground, their once deep connection reduced to fragments of anger and despair. Faris, unable to bear the suffocating secrecy any longer, began to spiral. He stopped caring about the consequences of his actions, finding solace in the idea of exposing the truth. For Faris, this wasn't just about their relationship anymore, it was about reclaiming his identity and breaking free from the constraints that had dictated his life for so long. The pain of hiding, the loss of his journal, and Zion's engagement to Ifrah had pushed him to the edge. Zion, on the other hand, grew increasingly paranoid. He knew Faris was unstable, and the thought of their secret coming to light terrified him. Their parents had started noticing the strain between the brothers, questioning why they no longer spent time together. Zion deflected their concerns, blaming the distance on his busy schedule and Faris's focus on his art. But the facade was crumbling, and Zion felt powerless to stop it. One evening, after another tense day of avoidance and silence, Zion found Faris in their shared room. Faris was packing a bag, his movements hurried and deliberate. Zion's heart sank as he realized what was happening. Faris had made up his mind he was leaving. Zion tried to stop him, pleading with him to think about their family, their reputation, and the consequences of his actions. But Faris was resolute. He accused Zion of being a coward, someone who cared more about appearances than the truth of their love. The argument escalated quickly, with both brothers shouting accusations and reopening old wounds. In the heat of the moment, Faris said something that changed everything. He threatened to tell their parents the truth, to expose their secret once and for all. For him, it was an act of liberation, a way to force Zion to confront the reality they had both been running from. But for Zion, it was the ultimate betrayal, a threat that could destroy everything they had tried so hard to protect. Blinded by panic and anger, Zion lashed out. The argument turned physical, their emotions boiling over into a violent confrontation. In the chaos, Zion shoved Faris harder than he intended, and Faris lost his balance, falling backward and hitting his head on the corner of their desk. The room fell silent as Faris collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Zion froze, his mind unable to process what had just happened. He knelt beside Faris, desperately trying to wake him, but it was too late. Faris's lifeless body lay before him, a devastating reminder of how far they had fallen. In the aftermath, Zion was consumed by guilt and horror. He knew he couldn't explain what had happened without revealing their secret, so he staged the scene to look like an accident. He placed Faris's body in the backyard, making it appear as though he had slipped and hit his head while working on an art project. The police arrived the next morning, and the family was devastated by the news of Faris's death. To the outside world, it was a tragic accident a young artist lost too soon. But Zion knew the truth, and it haunted him. He had not only lost the person he loved most, but had also become the architect of his downfall. As the days turned into weeks, Zion struggled to maintain the lie. The weight of his guilt was unbearable, and every interaction with his family felt like a betrayal. He had destroyed the one person who had truly understood him, and now he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone.